Welcome to the LabVIEW experiment. I am your host, Sam Taggart from SAS Workshops. In my 15 years of working with and training developers, I've had the opportunity to conduct a lot of experiments. Over here, we believe in embracing failure as the essential learning experience that it is. And what better way to learn than from other people's mistakes? In this podcast, I talk to industry experts, colleagues, and friends about their failures and how they have turned them into future successes. I'm here today with Jeff DeBuhr, who is a LabVIEW champion, been around for quite a while, done a lot of stuff in the community, and he's also on the GDevCon board with myself and several other people. So welcome, Jeff.
Thank you, Sam. Don't forget, I'm a certified LabVIEW architect, too. Got to put that in there.
I thought that was just a given, but yeah. Well, it's actually not true for all of the LabVIEW champions, so.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
There are some who actually aren't, which I was kind of surprised to learn because I thought that was just kind of a given. But
that's what I thought too, until I saw that it could be anybody.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't. Yeah, that didn't come from a place of elitism. I just figured that everybody who was there just happened to also be
right. Yeah. See what happens when you assume things.
Yeah, yeah. So I had this conversation just recently with Malcolm about how the certification, like if you're in industry, there's not necessarily a huge incentive to get certified unless you're out job hopping, I guess.
Right. You're right. That's exactly right. I mean, I did my certification for me, not for the job, but for me.
Yeah. So Malcolm and I had a brief discussion about the value of certification stuff. And one thing it does show is if you're in industry and they don't care about it, you actually take the time to take the test, and that shows that you at least have some level of dedication.
Yep.
So, cool. So, you're on the GDevCon NA board.
I am.
Can you tell me a little bit about like what drew you to that and what the vision, I guess, for that?
So, it's kind of funny how I got drawn to that. Actually, it was a conversation that you and I had, Sam, several years ago at a CLA conference. I think you had talked about, we were sitting around at a dinner somewhere, and you had talked about GDevCon NA and just the idea of it. And, I thought that, hey, that's a great idea because we don't have a lot of that. And with things the way they've moved in the last 5-6 years, we'll say, there's not a lot of true development conferences anymore. So at that point, I'm like, sure, Sam, I'll sign up and listen. Because it was a proof of concept, I think, at first. And I made a few board meetings as just a visitor, more or less, or consultant, whatever you want to call me, because I wasn't a board member at first. I kind of said, well, I'm not too sure yet. I had to see how my life was going to be. And it happened to be one of those couple meetings that I missed that you guys decided you needed someone else. I had already known a lot of it, and I got voted in, which was a surprise to me.
You got voted told.
I wasn't there to defend myself, but that's okay. It's been since then, it's been a lot of fun. Unfortunately, had to miss the first conference, but this last year being at the conference, I think being on the other side of the event was really cool. And I think that's what I really enjoy doing. I love the content. I love listening to the content, but organization and saying, looking back and say, I was part of that and I did that. And I just think that's so cool.
Yeah, there is a feeling of accomplishment, but I do have to say that attending the conference is very different when you're organizing.
Yes.
I think Alan put it as like being in Mr. Rick mode or something from like Casablanca, like you're trying to run the whole thing and there's not time to like pay attention and sit down and enjoy it.
So. Right. I think some of, it all depends on how your attitude is too when you're in that position. When I'm doing stuff like that or I'm organizing something, I'm a part of that. I'm making sure everything's flowing as smoothly as possible, right? You're going to have your hiccups, but like you said, you're in it's a different mode, a different mindset, different perspective for sure.
Yeah, you're getting interrupted constantly by people like asking you questions about what's going on or what's up next and things like that.
Right.
So,
when's the next meal because I'm hungry? Yeah, right, that sort of stuff, right?
Yeah.
Which is totally understandable.
Yeah, a lot of questions like, hey, I'm going on next. Can I check out my AV setup or whatever? Like,
Right.
Yeah, it was very hard to just kind of mingle and relax.
Right. But that's what happens when you're the guys running the show, right?
The tuning afterwards was my relaxing time. So I highly encourage anybody who comes this year to come enjoy that. It was fun. Yeah, so this year I kind of want to see what we can do as far as like recreational activities outside of the conference. I know this past year we tried the concert, and that was interesting. There were definitely some people who were very into it, but then there were other people who wanted to talk, and it was very loud. And so we'll have to see what kind of ideas we can come up with.
Yes. I think a couple things that were mentioned were either having that place or having the conference room at a hotel and doing like a game night for some people. And then some people, they just want to talk. They just want to network, you know.
So
You
just
can't,
have like a network cocktail hour or something, or you're having cocktails or
well, you know, your cocktail hour, then your dinner, and then maybe some drinks afterwards with maybe dessert, like some desserts that are left out a little longer, cookies or whatever, and just hang out and talk. Because during the conference, the only time they really get to talk is lunch, breakfast, you know, or any break.
yeah, there is a lot of value to the so-called hallway track of just you know conversations that happen in the hallway and in the bar afterwards or wherever we end up going afterwards.
Yep. Yep. Absolutely.
That's I kind of want to try and experiment if I can convince enough people to do the like on conference thing and just have like an open track where basically like we define it on the fly based on who's there and what people want to talk about. I think that could be an interesting thing to try out.
So I sort of do something like that at my user group meetings. So each user group meeting, we do 4 a year. We have set topics for something. So for example, this last meeting, I had invited Darren and Alan Smith, both to the meeting. Darren talked about maps and sets because he's got a presentation, and it kind of leads into it from simple things, you know, arrays and all the other ways we've done things in the past, arrays, clusters, and then he goes to maps and sets. Great intro. It was awesome. That followed with Alan's presentation that he did at GDevCon actually, but he pulled out the basics of it and he just did the complex side. So it was a nice flow from I am a beginner, I've used LabVIEW for 20 minutes to I have been using LabVIEW for 20 years. And I am a CLA and I am a champion and whatever else. So it was a nice flow. But then to get to the on-conference piece, every meeting, and it doesn't always work, but every meeting I have a section set aside at the end. It's called, I think it's now called Little LabVIEW Stories. And all it is there anybody here, now that we're hybrid kind of thing, anybody here or remote, whatever, do you have something you want to talk about? I made this cool thing, right? I made this tool. I made this driver. I made whatever it is. Or it could be, I'm working on this and I'm stuck. Or I don't know how I can get to this point to do whatever. And it's open. I don't ask anybody at the beginning what they want to talk about. It doesn't matter to me. I'm just looking for that new voice, that new face to step up and say, hey, I need some help, or hey, look at this cool gadget I made to help me in my workday. And it's open to anything LabVIEW related. Sometimes it works, other times not so much. But I think if you did a conference with that piece incorporated somewhere in it, you could get some turnout.
Yeah, I think that enables like that hallway track discussion, but to have it with a larger group, I think.
Yes.
Just like the one-on-one.
Yes.
Because oftentimes I think in the hallway, a lot of those conversations happen, but they only benefit the two people who are right there. And you know, sometimes like I do this at an hour, like I'll be walking down the hallway and somebody will be having a conversation. I'll just stop and stand next to them. It's kind of creepy, but I stand there and I listen. I'm like, oh, that's a very interesting conversation. You know?
Yes. Yeah. I've done that too. I think we all have done that once, at least once. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's kind of cool. You hit on something earlier though, which I think is a challenge for user groups and for GDevCon and all the conferences, is balancing that, having enough advanced content that you attract the advanced people and you can keep their interest, while at the same time having enough beginner content that you don't drive beginners away either.
Yeah, that there's a hard balance there. You get diehards, right? So like, I'm lucky enough that in our area, in the Chicago area, we have Mark Balla, we have Mark Yedinek, Matt Fitzsimons. Those three are just, three other champions, three CLAs, and a few others that I've worked with in the past too that, they're always there. They don't care. Mark Balla especially. There's a user group meeting, he's there. Doesn't matter if you're talking about strings or how to use a numeric or how to fix a coercion dot, something simple to, we're going to talk about how we can take, put an interface with a class and build something super complex. He's always there. But getting I think it's not necessarily getting the seasoned guys there as much, because if they've been there once, they know what it's like, they'll come back. And they may not come to every meeting, but they'll come back. It's getting those new people involved. And like you said, if I go into a user group meeting and it's all advanced topics that are high level, and I'm 20-minute LabVIEW, developer, I'm going to sit there with a deer in the headlights the whole time. But if you can try and make something where you have, in the smaller setting like we do, start basic, move to something intermediate, and then maybe we go way advanced, or maybe we don't. And depending on what the topic is, sometimes it'll generate a lot of good discussion. So, but like you said, that's a hard balance. The other thing I find is, advertising for that's a key, but that's beside the point. I mean, getting the word out that, hey, we got a user group meeting and this is what it's going to be about, and then I think, that for next year, I may start adding that, well, this is the basic, or this is the beginner, this is the intermediate and advanced to help make the group grow. So it's not like, oh, I see those topics, I know nothing about them, and I'm not going to go because I'm going to feel, this big in a pond of, these big fish. Kind of like me when I first went to the CLA Summit. I felt about this big in a, a small fish in a big pond. That's what I felt like at the first CLA Summit. And we all feel that way at some point in life.
Yeah, I think, that definitely happens. I think everybody gets to the CLA Summit. That's like a rite of passage. But you hit on a couple of points. One is, I think it's hard to advertise to those beginners because the more advanced users already know where to find us and they're already plugged in, and those beginners are often not plugged into the system.
Yes.
Yeah. And then I think the other challenge too, like the CLA Summit, I think part of the reason that people feel way overwhelmed there is I feel like, I'm probably upset some people want to say this, but I think there's some big egos in the room, and I think there's a lot, and everybody, and I'm probably as guilty of this as anybody else. People get up there and they want to show off, and they want to show how clever they are, and so you get all these really advanced presentations. But I'm a big fan of like, the better you know the basics, the more advanced you are. Like, you don't need to do really, like, you could do a lot with just basic LabVIEW if you truly understand what's going on.
Yeah.
You don't need, like Active Framework's great. I'm not like poo-pooing Active Framework, but like, you can write really awesome code and just plain LabVIEW if you really understand what's going on. So just using.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I tend to agree. As far as the ego comment, I mean, there's going to be big egos anywhere you go, no matter what you do, right? But I don't know that it's that necessarily, but I think you hit it the nail on the head is, I'm proud to show off what I did. Yeah. And that's it. It's like, look at this cool thing. Same thing in a user group. Look at this cool thing I made.
Yeah. And
some of us might be sitting there with the deer in the headlights like, oh my God, how can I be here with that? Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, also the ego thing too. It might not be so much ego in the sense, but it might be like a lot of the people who go to the CLA summits are consultants. And so they're also like trying to get their, like, I was definitely guilty of that. Like when I was first presenting, like I was trying to get my name out as a consultant. So I wanted to show that I could do all these crazy advanced things too.
Yes.
It wasn't so much like I wanted to do like for me, for my own ego, but it was more building the business type of thing and getting your name out there.
Yes. Yep. Totally agree with that.
So I had another interesting thought on the whole conference thing, and that is, I feel like we do a lot of very, very technical presentations, and I feel like we could use more presentations on business stuff and more on like the people skills and the quote softer skills of like how to interact with people, how to manage teams. And I think that benefits everyone, even like beginner LabVIEW programmers, because part of programming is selling your ideas. What do you think of that?
Yeah, the the challenge, well, not challenge necessarily, it's the word I'm looking for. Maybe more the buy-in, right? If you had, it's with I think a lot of that makes sense to do. How to work in a team, how to work alone, or and then in the management side, yeah, you've got some senior people that are like, well, I'm not, if they're a manager of a group, they kind of get their hands off of LabVIEW a little bit. I think I'm not there. I'm not a consultant, as you know, but I work in a group now with a team of, counting in my head, 1, 2, 3, 4, I'll say 4.5 LabVIEW developers. And the reason I say half is because one of them that I mentor is in another group. So we'll say 5 actual people that work on LabVIEW daily. And being the level that I'm at, doing the architect job that we got trained to do, you know what I mean? When you take your architect exam, that's like, to me, it's like training of, you are building a system. You are building a system with a lot of holes. Now it's time for the developer to fill those holes with what they need for their job, right? Or their project. And then they go to the next project and they take that architecture and they repeat and just rinse and repeat, right? So I think if it was more, on that level, I'm not management, but I think if it's more of if the management that we talked about would be more from a technical aspect than from like an HR aspect, right? Because whenever I see the word manager, I think HR, compensation, daily life, that sort of thing, right? But you have the management of, if I'm managing a group, am I doing work or am I a technical lead? Maybe it's not how to manage. Maybe the term is how to be a technical leader.
Yeah, I like that. Well, the other side too that I was not thinking the HR side. I was thinking more like, more like just dealing with people and also the managing the work, like how we break work up, how we distribute it, how we think about how we do that. Like the process side of it a little bit. Like how do we track issues? How do we take this big project that we have and break it down into smaller chunks? And how do we work? Do we all work together at one time on the same thing, or do we split up and work in parallel? And how do we manage that? And how do we merge things back together? I think those are all interesting topics.
So those I think would fall on, how to be a technical leader, how to be part of a team, how to work as a team.
Yes.
How to not necessarily work as a team, but how to develop as a team, how to develop one project as a team. What is your competency for, all right, I've got this big project and I'm going to break it up between 3 of us, all working on the same thing. But we all need to use code repositories to put our code somewhere. How do we manage that? How do we check it in? How do we merge it? I mean, there's this whole list of questions. I had a topic. I had a user group meeting this last summer, had it all planned out, and my presenters didn't show up. And it could have been a miscommunication, which it's not a big deal. But after about 10 minutes, I'm like, I got to come up with something. So we talked about, in that particular meeting, we talked about code repositories and how to use, I use Fork with Bitbucket is what I use. And we walked through that, how to use it, how it works, and sometimes, like for me, a lot of times it's got to be visual. You can tell me till you're blue in the face how a repository works, and I'll look at it like, what are you talking about? But as soon as I see visually the tree and how the branches work and come together and do all these different things, I'm golden. So, but that topic spawned a lot of discussion, which was really cool.
Yeah, the visual thing totally makes sense for a LabVIEW programmer. So
yeah,
I can totally see that. Yeah, there's lots of strong opinions around source code control and the best ways to use it, and I've been engaged in some of those discussions lately. So
I have learned that there's no best way.
There's the best way for you.
Yeah, there's
And I don't even know if it's the best way, but there's a way that works for you.
yes.
But I would caution you that sometimes I see people doing things and they've adapted to the way that they do things, but it's not necessarily the best. Like being a consultant, sometimes you come in and you see people doing things like as an example, it's not so script controlling, but I worked on this project where they had this machine and the lady's like, okay, so to start it up, I click on this tab, I click this button. Then I got to click on this tab and turn this motor on. Then I got to go over here and click here and verify that this number's within, right? She goes through this checklist of like 10 things. And I'm like, what if you could just press a button? Like, but she had adapted to that and that was totally normal, right? And she didn't even want me to change that. And I'm like, so just because something works for you does not necessarily mean that it couldn't be better, I guess.
Agreed. And that, like you said, is not just source control. That's for everything.
Yeah.
You know, when I do code reviews, and as well as you know, but many may not, I use DQMH, and I have my own architecture based off of DQMH framework. I want it a certain way, and that's just because it fits the best this way for our design. I have one developer that's like, but why can't we do it this way? No, that's great. That's right. There's nothing wrong with it, but it's not the way that we have set up to be. And it's the same thing. Is my architecture the greatest in the world? No. Is there something better? Probably. Does something make a little more sense? Maybe. But the way I envisioned it is the way, you want to move forward with it. So
I was sitting in a conference this morning and they were talking about how principles, like we have all these coding principles, the dry and YAGD and all these other ones and solid principles and all this stuff that people go on about. And basically their complaint was that those things are great in the original context, but what we do is we take them out of context and we try to apply them everywhere. And then it causes more problems than help sometimes. I thought that was an interesting thought.
Interesting. Yeah.
And it goes along with that idea of like, everybody's context is unique. So what works in one location, you can't just take the exact set of practices and port them over to yours. To me, it's like understanding. I actually like the idea of principles, but like, I like to try and look at something and say, try to figure out why it works, right? And then take that understanding and then apply it somewhere else, as opposed to taking the exact practice.
Sure. No, I totally agree. And, to go back to my example of, a coworker saying, well, I want to do it this way. And I said, no, right? Mm-hmm. It's not that I didn't like the new idea. It's just the way that it's just more implementation, right? Yeah. That's a great way to do it. And I like how it's done, but it just doesn't fit the implementation scheme that we are looking at. In this particular instance, just, it was, I have three pieces to it. I have my meat and potatoes code, my main code. I have a UI, and I have two UI displays. One's for setup and one's for during running a test. And I've kind of made it explicit that I want everything done in the main code. I don't want, we could do functions in the other ones, right? But I don't want to see in DQMH a lot of, if I want to send something to one of the modules, I'm going to do a broadcast. And I don't really want to have a request module from my settings or my test display inside my main. Just because if I ever want to change things, if someone comes by and says, that UI is ugly, you need to change it for the test because I want a different display for test. As I explained to them, now you can build this new module and then it's just a couple of quick changes in your main code and it's done. You don't have to go find every single request that you made for the one test UI to replace it with the new one. And once
coupling and dependency stuff.
Yes. And it's just, in that case, it's like, oh, now I get it. Even though it might make sense to do it the other way, because I'm looking future, that's why it,
Well, specifically in LabVIEW, and I know how it is in other programs, but I feel like LabVIEW developers do not pay anywhere near as much attention to that as they should.
I never,
Just a generalization. I never did either. But yeah, since I got into DQMH and an active framework too, you've really got to pay attention to those things.
Yes.
And I find anti-dock is really useful for that. So like as I'm building my program, I'm constantly running anti-dock and looking at the dependency graph and the messaging diagrams and making sure all the arrows are going the correct way.
Yeah, I haven't done that yet. I've used anti-dock for a couple things, but I have not looked at that yet.
Well, what definitely has killed me on dependencies in the past is type defs. I had a really big complex actor framework system, and it took forever to load and build. And Steve Watts is like, "Are you using type defs?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Move them all into a separate folder and take them out of every library." And I did that, and it suddenly like sped up a ton. Because apparently I had one type def that was in an actor and something was passing a message, so it was using the type def and something else was passing it a message. And so these type defs were like causing all this cross-linking, and it was pretty crazy.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And it's not like an immediately obvious, like if you're sending a message, okay, yes, I agree. When I'm sending a message, yeah, I have to know about it. Okay, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sending a message to this thing that's then sending a message to something else. And because I've passed the type def all the way through, now I depend on that last module, even though I shouldn't.
Right.
At the end of it. Yeah. So I've gotten to like, I try very hard at like the module boundaries to just pass generic LabVIEW data types and try to avoid passing type defs if I can.
Yeah.
And type defs within a module and within an actor,
Sure.
But like anything that goes in or out, I try very hard to make it just straight up non and type def stuff.
It gets tough depending what you're sending, right? I mean, there's some types it's like, oh yeah, I can do this, and it's others like, well, maybe I can make it work. And in some cases, it's just like, no, I don't have a choice. I got to make it work.
But then it's still weird, though, because even if you make it work, if you put the type def off in a folder, now you've got this folder full of type defs, and you want to reuse something from one of your code, and you grab it, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I can't find this type def, and now you've got to go find this other type def, as opposed to, like, it's nice when it's all in one library, it's all in one folder, and you can just... So the whole thing of putting libraries in the same folder, I got to tell you the story. Sorry if I'm embarrassing the customer that this was. I'm not going to use their name, but they'll know who they are. They didn't make this mess. They inherited it, but they had a folder with all the library files in it, and then another folder with all the VIs for all the libraries. And I was like, wow. Like, yeah, that was a strange one that left me scratching my head, because obviously they skipped the whatever LabVIEW core class they teach that in. But...
And there's so many people that don't go through a lot of the classes like that, and then they just learn by trial and error.
Yeah.
And that's something that, in this case, have been like, well, if we had a user group meeting that we could have contacted them and they would have come to, that could have been a topic of one of them. Yeah. How to effectively use libraries. Do's and don'ts.
Yep. Well, it's very interesting. Like, I feel like you can teach yourself a lot of stuff on your own. You could pick up the basics if you're like, if you've got an aptitude for it. But I feel like you miss some of the little things. Like even me, like when I teach some of the beginner classes for an NI, I learn new things. I see stuff and I'm like, wait, I didn't know you could do that. Like the latest example was the format into string, right? You drop the thing and you drop the little constant, you type %.2f or whatever, and it formats it. If you double click on that primitive, it opens up a dialog box. Did you know that?
No.
Yes, go try that next time. It's wild. It's a dialog box, and you don't have to remember all the format codes or anything. You can put it in there, and it'll generate. It says like, do you want a fraction or a decimal or whatever, and how much precision and blah blah blah, and it like spits out the. And when you close the box, it drops a constant with all that written on it already. It's crazy.
Do you have to double click on the connector spot for that, or just the
icon, like the expandable icon? Just double click on it and it opens up a dialog, and it's like, the guy came up to me at class, was asking me about the dialog box. I'm like, where'd that dialog box even come from? He's like, oh, I got it from double clicking on this thing. I was like, so interesting. But there's a lot of little corners of LabVIEW that, like, if you've never done anything in that area, you wouldn't know.
Yes, agreed. Yep.
Yeah. So. Yeah, I'm sure there's lots of other ones that I can think of. Like I had a discussion with Alan, I think, on the podcast, how like holding down control and scrolling on a case structure scrolls through the cases.
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I learned that late in life. Yes,
I discovered that on my own one day. I was doing something, I happened to hold control down or whatever, and I was like, wait, what just happened? And I was like, oh, I'm like, that's really interesting. So yeah, there's a lot of little interesting.
Yes, there are.
So I have a question for you. I want to get your opinion. So I took this Python class the other day, and I discovered this thing called Black that auto formats Python code. So like basically when you save it, it like fixes all the indentation and like just like all the cosmetic stuff. And one of the thoughts was that the reason for doing that is that then if you do that every time you save it, then it cuts down on the noise when you're trying to diff stuff. Because since both files were formatted with the same thing, all the white space just goes away and it's no longer an issue. And I was wondering if that would be, if something like that could be useful for LabVIEW. I mean, I don't know how often you end up viewing diffs in LabVIEW, but if you ever have, like, you get a lot of noise. You get like, every time you move something on the block diagram or on the front panel, like the front panel, you sometimes care, but if it's a sub-VI and you move something like 2 pixels, do you really care? Like,
yeah, I something like that would be kind of nice, but I think that's what the theoretical, like, block diagram.
Yeah, that's immediately what I jumped to is like block diagram flip. But like I was thinking, like one of the things, like for example, right? Like if you're looking at a VI and you happen to change what case is visible and you accidentally save it, now it counts as a diff. So what if you had a program that like when it saved it would just reset all those to 0, whatever the 0 frame was, just to avoid having that diff? Because like generally, do you really care what frame is showing? Like maybe you do, but like if you could just, there's got to be things like that. And like, position of the stuff on the block diagram, like that would be kind of hard to clean that up in a meaningful way. But
well, I thought there were filters in the diff. Well, maybe there's not.
Well, even if there's filters in the diff tool, though, Git still flags it. And so I don't know how many times I've run the diff tool with those filters in place, and it shows up. It says, "Hey, there's no difference," and I'm like,
"Yeah,
great. I just wasted 30 seconds loading the diff tool to tell that there's no difference. Like, why do I care?" Yeah.
Yeah, it would be, if there was something that could be done, that would be kind of nice.
So kudos to NI where it's due. I don't often give NI kudos, but I will give them kudos on the diff tool. They did make it better in that all those flags that you had to pass as command line parameters, now, I don't know if you've noticed, they show up in the dialog box now, so you can turn them off like interactively as you're looking at it.
Oh, I haven't seen that.
That idea, and NI, very good kudos. So
cool.
Yeah. I gotta make sure, like, I give them some credit when I get the chance.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
They give me more chances to give them credit. So, very cool. So, we were talking about onboarding new people. You gave a presentation at one of the, was it NI Week, about DQMH and onboarding people?
I did. Yeah, 2019. Little backstory on, before we get into the presentation itself, a little backstory on the presentation was, I was at a CLA summit prior to NI Week. So that would have been the 2018 CLA summit. And we were out. There's a few of us out, and I was talking to someone. I can't think of her name now. She's no longer at NI. But she was helping. I think her and Nancy were ones talking about, looking for presenters and stuff like that. And Fabiola had mentioned to Nancy, I think it was, that I had taught my intern, who had never used LabVIEW in his life, how to get a program completely done and running in 90 days using DQMH. So they had, it was learning the program, loading LabVIEW, right? Installing it.
Yeah.
Installing DQMH, going through all the steps, building a program, debugging it. I don't think we built it, didn't do an executable, which is okay, but the program was still done. Mm-hmm. And Fabiola was so proud or excited or both about the accomplishment of, I could, that could be done, and it was using her tool, right?
Yeah.
So then Nancy's like, Fab's like, you got to do a presentation. I'm like, I don't really want to do a presentation. Then Nancy got on me, and then someone else did. And it's not that they got on me. They're just like, come on, you got to do it. You got to do it. I'm like, fine, I'll do one. And I'm not I'll be quite honest, I don't like doing slideshow presentations. I see them all the time, but I did one for this. And that was probably, I think for the presentation, that was the hardest part, putting the slides together. Because user groups, if I'm presenting, people know me now. There's no slides. It's all code, or it's something, or we're using a tool, or whatever it is. Or I'm talking, or I have someone showing code and I'm talking about it. But it's just, to me, that's just the way I present. Anyway, so I did that with an intern, and that was in 2018. That was my first experience with an intern. I just started using DQMH, and now I'm gonna try and count 1, 2, 3, 6, 7 interns maybe since then. So between here and in our 2 facilities that we had, I've taught them all pretty much the same way. I've kind of tweaked it as I've moved along. I've gotten it better to where now I have an example that I give. So my example kind of follows our pattern that we use for our architecture. It uses my template. So they start with my template. They do a few things. I walk them through it. I have all the notes. Some of the notes I pulled out of the DQMH notes, right? And I put them inside the document so that they don't have to go searching for it. It's like, this is what request means. This is what broadcast means. Or when you go to the, as you know, if I'm going to go create I'm creating an event, right? And you can choose request, broadcast, round trip, request with reply, whatever. I put all the information on those in my documentation so they don't have to go find it every time. So as they read through, it's like, oh, this is what this is. Anyway, so I've done that. And then all my new interns, or any new interns I have in a team now, I'm just like, okay, when you're done with LabVIEW, you got to go through Core 1, Core 2, if you've never done it before, because I want you to get familiar with the tool set. Then if you think you're pretty confident, we can try this. And if it's too much, then you can do Core 3. Then come back and let's, go through it. So seems to work pretty well. And, I try to make myself available to all the interns all the time to, if they ever have questions, that I'm right there. I don't want to give somebody work and say, oh, sorry, I'm busy with my project. I'll come back in an hour. I try to be in the, now with the whole can work from home sort of thing. If I have an intern in the office, I'm usually there. I want them to have access to me. I want them to succeed. Why? Because I'd like them to, if they like that test engineering, because I'm a test automation, I'd like them to do that. A lot of them, that's a stepping stone to other things, which is great, but they have a fun time doing LabVIEW when they're there.
Yeah, no, it's cool. Yeah, I feel like people need some kind of support system like that. Like just getting thrown into it. Like when I started, I pretty much just got thrown into it. Although my boss at the time was smart enough. He bought me the training and certification memberships. So I took all the classes, so that really helped. But and I replaced this guy who was retiring, and he came in like once a week. But like the rest of the time, I was pretty much on my own. And yeah, I learned a lot. But it would have been easier if I had somebody like showing me the ropes.
Yeah, I learned. So I'm gonna date myself now. I learned LabVIEW. My first touch with LabVIEW was 3.11. So we're on what, version 22?
Yeah.
And I think that's the number. I don't even know anymore. But so 3.11 was like circa 95, 96. I mean, I remember and I took courses. I took their official LabVIEW courses.
Yep.
In 1996, it was 5 days, 3 days of basic, 2 days of advanced. That was it. That's all you, and that, so, and then I did stuff, but I was kind of, I won't say pigeonholed, but you're kind of like within constraints because of the group I was working for. I wasn't architecting. I was just one of the many doing stuff for that architecture. So I had limited stuff that I could do. After that, after I left there and I got a different job, I was by myself on my own. And I only knew so much, right? Because I hadn't used LabVIEW in a couple of years, and a lot of things had changed from version 6 that I had. Yeah. So I said, I'm going to take, at the time was intermediate courses, and I probably still have the books sitting here. So I took intermediate, And that just kind of opened my eyes to a lot of things. And then I started experimenting and doing things, and I started getting better. And it's like, okay, now I want to keep learning and doing different things. And then I'm like, everybody's like, you got to get certified. Okay, I'll get certified. So took the CLAD, was proud that I took that, but it was pretty straightforward. Went and took the CLD. I'm like, I'm going to fail. I passed it the first time. I was pretty happy about that. I renewed it one time, and then the next time I had to renew it, that's when the questions got harder, and everybody's like, Jeff, you just got to go get your CLA. There's a summit. I'm like, wait, what? And that just kind of sold me. Got my CLA, rest is history. And now it's just, I'm not necessarily the sponge anymore, but I'm always up for learning new things. When I went to the first summit, I heard of Active Framework. So I kind of self-taught because I worked by myself from 2004 up until the job I have now. Even though I worked for a company that had multiple architects, we were all on different projects. We never really collaborated together on anything. We would talk to each other. Hey, I want to bounce this off of you. Hey, I want to bounce this off of you. That sort of thing. Like any of us do when we network, but it wasn't like we're working on this project together. I didn't get that till I got where I am now. And it's just a different world. I mean, if you work by yourself compared to a team, totally different.
Yeah, working by yourself, you could pick up a lot of bad habits. That's one problem. The other problem is just at least you had people to bounce ideas off of, but if you're by yourself and you don't have anybody to bounce ideas off of, that's really... Because the way I look at it, I'm like, every idea that occurs to me is a good idea, because if it was a bad idea, I would have thrown it out on my own, right?
Right.
So every rabbit hole I go down, must be, at least to me, seems like a good idea at the time. So having somebody there can be like, yeah, no, that's a dead end, or that's an anti-pattern. Don't go do that. Cause yourself problems later.
Yeah, but even in a team, you can do that because, like the title of this, the LabVIEW experiment. You want to know from us what experiments we've tried that we've not gone our way, right? So, yeah, there's probably I could probably name a whole bunch that didn't go my way when I was by myself with nobody to bounce things off of. But we won't go there because that's probably, 15 years ago. And it's probably the stuff that I did then is pretty much irrelevant to today's date. But I will tell you, even now in a group, that there are things that you'll do that you think this is the greatest idea. And when Darren hears this, he's going to be laughing hysterically because we talk about pack libraries, which he's, that's like you say, pack libraries, he's getting the holy water, he's going to throw it on you so you can just melt away because they're bad, right? So I went down this path of pack libraries. I'm like, we needed to have good version control in our code. I was creating lots of modules for guys to use, modules, drivers, whatever, however you want to call it. Some were modules, some were drivers, right? I would create a module for a driver talking to a signal generator, but I have 5 different flavors of signal generator. So I made it one driver that could talk to all of them. Same with the power supply, any piece of equipment. Doesn't matter what brand it is. We would make it so it was for the developer. I put down power supply. I tell it what it is, and then it just works.
Mm-hmm.
I did the same with the DAC. I have this, this would be something Norm would be like jumping up and down, screaming at the computer, Jeff, why did you do that, right? But it works for me. I created that DAC HAL, so it makes it easier for some of my developers. It's all the same. There's nothing different. If I go to look at someone else's code, I know it instantly because it's like, oh, you're using that DAC and you're using this and you're using this. So anyway, I had all these created, VIPM, install them on all the machines. Great, win, right? Now I got version problems. Why does this one work, but this one doesn't, right? Well, I made a fix to the DAC. It got implemented here and built and put out there, but the version before it had an older DAC, and who knows what other drivers were old, right? So I needed a better way to version control things. And I had this bright idea. Well, why don't we put them in pack libraries? That way, when the developer's using it, they've got code that's developed, that's already compiled. If it works in their computer, it'll work on the test system, essentially. All right, great. So I do that. I put them in a common directory. I build it all out. I added them to a palette. It was a little bit of a challenge for that, but I made it work. I wasn't happy, but it worked. Jim actually at JKI, they updated, the VIPM so I could do the pack libraries a little different, which is good.
Yeah.
So the problem I ran into is I had these pack libraries in a common spot that any application on a computer could call those libraries. However, if I updated a pack library and I missed something as I try to keep them backwards compatible and I put it on a test system, I would run that code. I'm like, sweet, it works. And I walk away. I get a call 20 minutes later. Yeah, the code's broke. What? Oh, I tried running XYZ program. Doesn't work. Well, I was testing ABC, right? New program. I was testing this one program. Works fine. I didn't think to test the other 2 or 3 that are on there that use the same libraries. So something changed one of the libraries. Now what do? They both call the same library.
They're on the same machine.
They're on the same machine. So I had to backdate the new code and or I had to update the other 2 programs. Well, now crap. Every time I update, I got to update 3. Yeah, that's not going to work. So I'm like, now what? So, hard drive's cheap. I'm not too concerned about space, as a lot of people are, depending on the thing. So the new implementation I did this year was I'm still going to use the pack libraries, but when they're on our machine, they get buried into VILib, right? So I have them on my palette, and I can see them while I'm developing code, so you can just drop down whatever you want. When it gets deployed, they just get deployed to support libraries in the directory with the application. So now...
I was about to say that, yeah. If you had them all in a common library and you had 2 versions of one, could you just put it in the support library for the one that uses it, and then it would...
So I do, yeah. I could, and okay. I could have done...
Because it would search there first and not load the other one. Yeah.
I could have left it that way, but now I'm like, you know what? I don't want... Some of my developers are new, and if I have the interns, I don't want to confuse them. And I'm like, this is just a better way to go. So all I do is just grab all the pack libraries from dependencies that I use, and I dump them into... But then, of course, being the person that I am, it's like, well, power supplies, for example, right? I have 5 different power supplies, let's say. They all have different type of command sets or whatever else, right? So I have plugins for like a power supply.
Yeah.
So I can build the plugin, and I could just drop it into the directory, and it'll work.
Yeah.
Right? And that's what I did. Now it's like, okay, well, when I build this, the dependencies for those aren't there. So I had to add, post-build, I go through all those directories into VILib because it's a subdirectory of each of the...
Yeah.
And then I just drop them all in there. It works pretty well.
You gotta relink stuff, yeah.
No, I don't have to relink anything. I just have to copy them into the new support library folder. That's all. Just have to copy.
Okay. All right.
But yeah, it's... So far, it's worked. I haven't had a problem yet. And I think this is probably this is a better way to go. But, all the pack libraries are kind of isolated. Yeah. I don't really have one calling another. I might have a couple like that, but for the most part, it's just one by itself and it's a standalone.
Yeah, I think that's when you get into trouble. So I've used pack libraries. The one project I'm using right now, I use pack libraries. Only because I was having issues with load time, and I was like, if I build this or that into a packed library, maybe it'll work. And it was only like 1 layer deep, and it was fine.
Yeah.
But if your whole application is a bunch of packed libraries and you've got dependencies between them, my understanding is that gets pretty ugly pretty quick.
Yes, it does.
And you got to have a very well-defined build process, and you build things in the right order and make sure it's all linked correctly and in the right folders, and yeah.
I worked at another job where we were using packed libraries because those ran faster in test stand than regular code because it's already compiled. Mm-hmm. In fact, I was told by a test stand engineer back in 2014 or 15, the fastest code or the fastest way to run LabVIEW in test stand was to use an LLB.
Yeah, Darren says LLBs are really fast because it's like one disk access as opposed to like a library where you've got a bunch of individual files. Yeah. The
next fastest is a pack library. So because I don't really want to use an LLB and go down that path, pack libraries work. But when I was at this company, we were doing pack libraries, and we had a matrix of, here's my 10 pack libraries. You're changing pack library number 9. You have to rebuild starting at 1 and work your way up to 9 or whatever we had a matrix. If you change this, these are the ones you have to rebuild first or have to rebuild along with it. So yeah, it gets, when you're doing all that gets to be crazy. Well,
that's one of those areas that I think there's several areas in software development like that where like PPLs solve a certain set of problems. If you have those problems, then the pain of using PPLs is worth it.
Yes.
But if you don't have those problems, you're far better off avoiding them. So it's about understanding this new tool. What's the best application for? Where do the benefits outweigh the costs?
Right.
Yeah.
And you have to understand the risk, right? When I'm going down this path, what's the risk? So, I mean, for me, the experiment was I'm using pack libraries because I had needed to solve the problem of version control. Mm-hmm. But I did it in a way that I thought would work one way, and it didn't. Because my other thought on that, and I never even thought of this, is when I look, it's one pack library. So I would think that if there's one pack library, if I call application A or B, it's calling the same pack library, right? Mm-hmm. I thought it was calling the same instance of the pack library. So anything that B was using, A would see.
Wow.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it doesn't work that way.
No, yeah, it runs it runs in the app instance of whatever you're loaded.
It pulls it in the memory for that app.
They would each have, this one could change the functional global variable, but this one's not going to see it because it's a different app.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that burned me at first. I'm like, okay. Well, that didn't really go the way. It didn't kill. It wasn't like the end of the world, but it was like, it didn't run the way I expected it to run.
Yeah, well, then you could have, like if it was talking to an instrument, you could have two instances both talking to the same instrument. And yeah, because you intended it to be like the singleton type patterns.
Yeah, or you could say, sorry, you can't run this. Sorry, you can't run this because
some other program is using it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, so you'd have to do something with like lock files or something, or like Linux does or something like that. Yeah.
And that was just, forget it. So I moved on to this other, and I added to my my standard template. I have a little pop-up that just, you hit versions and it'll show every single version of everything. Your main program, every module it calls, and if there's, like if I'm running a test system that has like 3 signal generators, it'll say the signal generator module, the main module version, and then each of the plugins and its version. So
yeah, version control is a very big topic.
Yep.
You could do a whole podcast just on that. So
yes, you can.
It's been a great talking to you, Jeff. I could totally continue this conversation, but we should keep the time short so we don't draw it out too much. So I think we'll end it there. But thank you so much for coming on, and thanks for all your help with the GDevCon NA and everything else you do, Champions Program and all of that. And
well, thanks for having me. I look forward to the next GDevCon and probably our second chat for the LabVIEW experiment to pick up where we left off.
Yeah, no, definitely at some point I'll get around to interviewing people again. So we'll make a second round at some point.
Cool.
Very good. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right.
Would you like to sponsor an episode of the LabVIEW Experiment podcast? Drop us a line at hello@thelabviewexperiment.com.
That's it for today's episode of the LabVIEW Experiment. Thanks for listening. If you have any comments or questions, head over to thelabviewexperiment.com and drop me a note. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast and follow us on Twitter and Instagram at @TheLVExperiment so you never miss an episode. And remember, small steps and quick feedback are all you need. Catch you next time.